So a very good morning to everyone who has come on board our webinar session. On behalf of Skills Future Singapore and the Institute for Adult Learning, a very warm welcome to you this Wednesday morning. This session is jointly organized under the SSG Job Skills Insight webinar and IL Speaker Series banner. We are honored to partner Arizona State University to bring you this two-part webinar on adaptive learning. Part 1 will focus on the topic of enhancing skills development through using adaptive learning, and Part 2, which is held on 23rd of September, will touch on using adaptive instructional systems for skills-based learning. I'm Manyong, your moderator for today, and together with me, my team has Yen-Sun from SSG and Christopher from IAL. Now, over at SSG, we strongly believe in providing all Singaporeans with the opportunities to develop your potential throughout your life. We believe that the skills, passion, and contributions of every individual Singaporean will drive Singapore's next phase of development towards an advanced economy and a more inclusive society. Regardless of which point you are at in your life, you can be sure to find a variety of resources to help you attain skills mastery and make informed decisions to expand your skill set for professional and career development. IL, whose vision is to be the National Center of Excellence in Learning, Practice, and Research for continuing education and training, is a close partner of SSG and plays a critical role in raising the capabilities of CT professionals to enhance workplace learning and workforce learning and workplace performance. Today, our esteemed speaker is Mr. Dale Johnson, Director of Digital Innovation at the University Design Institute at ASU. Dale works closely with faculty, staff, and technology partners to implement technology solutions at ASU to enable student success. His relentless effort on this front has earned him accolades and awards, including the Outstanding Service Award by the IMS Global Learning Consortium for having demonstrated leadership in the adaptive courseware community of practice. Today's topic on adaptive learning is his area of expertise and also an area of strong interest among our Singapore's educator and training institutions, seeking to tailor and deliver a more effective learning experience for their learners. Dil is joining us from US, evening time now, I believe. So without further ado, let me welcome Dil. Over to you, Dil, please.
Thank you, Manyong. I want to start with a quote because I think that Singapore represents the future of workforce development, and you're living in this time when change is needed to support workers at all levels of their career. We think of this as a lifelong learning opportunity, and it looks to me like Singapore is very, very well placed and has implemented good programs to support that process. So the future is already here. Some of you are living in it. It's just not evenly distributed. And part of the challenge is for all of us to work together to define that future. So I want to start off with a poll today. Give me a sense of where you are in your experience. If you could fill out this poll now, and we'll give you a minute here to vote. And then I'll be using this information to guide my discussion of adaptive instruction and how we use it at Arizona State University. By the way, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona right now, and it is 45 degrees Celsius at 6 o'clock in the evening. Good. So one person has actually used and evaluated the systems. This is great. I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. So you can see that most of the audience has no experience with adaptive learning, and that's fine. By the end of this session, you should be able to talk about this with your colleagues and explain the basics of adaptive learning. I'm glad to see some of you have been researching them because I expect good questions from the audience. So bring your questions in and we'll see if we can answer them for you. As Manyoung said, I'll be speaking for about 30 minutes and then we'll have time for questions. So thank you for voting. So as I mentioned, I'm in Arizona. We're in the southwestern part of the United States, close to Los Angeles and Las Vegas. Our state is famous for the Grand Canyon. If you ever have a chance to visit, I would love to show you this marvel of the natural world. We're also famous for our desert landscape. As I mentioned, it's 45 degrees Celsius, and we have the saguaro cactus, which you may have seen in the movies, representing the southwestern desert in the United States. Our university is located in Phoenix, Arizona. It's an urban institution with a public research focus. We have about 126,000 students now. 40% of them are entirely online. They never come to campus and they receive their degree through the digital instructional systems that we provide. Phoenix has about 4.7 million people and it's a very rapidly growing area of the United States. Our university has gained fame in America because we've been named most innovative university for 5 years in a row. We're very proud of this fact that we've been using innovative technologies for instruction, for research, for administration, and we built a culture of continuous improvement. And I'll talk about how that affects our work with the students. After this session, you'll be able to define and demystify adaptive learning, explain how these systems work, and measure the success of the systems. This is so important to be able to take the information and use it for your own benefit as quickly as possible. I want to start off by highlighting some of the work that I already identified that's happening in the future in Singapore. For example, Nanyang Polytechnic is already working on a competency-based curriculum. I don't know if any of you are from Nanyang or are perhaps graduates of that university, but this is very exciting because it shows to me that you are thinking about the future and exploring the future and building the future. Now, I also noticed there was an announcement recently in the Straits Times that the Google coalition with Skills Future and a number of other groups is going to try to help re-educate some of the workforce to provide more skills and more opportunity. I highlighted this section from that article. It was very interesting to me that they had defined the program very clearly, 6-month program, 2,400 mid-career professionals, approximately $1,500 per month in support. If you do that math, that's over $21 million. So this is a very significant investment in the reskilling of the Singaporean workforce. And I'm sure this is just a very small piece. I know you're working on many other initiatives, but I wanted to start by highlighting this because when you start to think about the investment, you have to start to think about the variables. What are the things that matter here? Well, we have skill level. Where do the workers start and where do you want them to finish? So we have that as a variable. What about time? Why does it have to take 6 months? What if a worker can do this program in 6 weeks or even 6 days because they already have a lot of experience? So we start to look at these things differently when we start to think about adaptive systems. And then what about money? If a worker only needs 6 weeks instead of 6 months to achieve the same skill level, then the government of Singapore just saved a lot of money. And providing the infrastructure to deliver on that idea is what we'll talk about today. So right now, we're in the midst of a transformation. All of us have lived through this over the past 25 years. We're changing because our world is changing. The attention of the students and the workers and the adult learners is being distracted. Many of you are checking your email now, you're looking at your phone, you're texting your family. I understand that. That's normal because We have technology at our fingertips all the time. Here's an entire classroom full of students with their laptops. And here's another classroom where there's all kinds of projection technology and other material, and still the students are doing other things. This student is looking at pictures of babies. There's another student who's looking at family photos. If you look carefully, you'll see that the technology is not necessarily being used the way we would want it to be used. So part of the lesson here is that technology is not the only solution. It has to be combined with other changes to pedagogy and to the infrastructure and in the learning process. Because the transformation is happening in every aspect of our life. We have seen a rapid change from mass production, and these are CDs, compact discs. I probably have 300 of them. Some of you may have some too. To mass personalization, where I have 3 million songs on my phone. So within 20 years, even less, within the last 10 years, from mass production to mass personalization. What about transportation? We used to have to worry about maps. Today, we all have a map of the world on our phone. I was in Seoul, Korea last year. I don't speak Korean, and I could go anywhere in the city using the navigation on my phone. So as we get used to this process from mass production in healthcare to DNA with mass personalization, we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean for education? Where we have a 2,000-year history of delivering the same lesson to all students at the same time. Now that history was really a reflection of the lack of technology. We had no alternative. We had a classroom and a teacher, and that's what we have to do. But today we have options. So today when we talk about mass personalization, we want to talk about delivering the right lesson to the right student at the right time. This is the definition of adaptive learning. If anybody asks you, what did you learn today? You'll say, I learned that adaptive learning means deliver the right lesson to the right student at the right time. This is how Singapore can start to reduce the $21 million expenditure. This is how Singapore can start to increase the skills of the citizens, because you're going to find that students are at all levels in their learning process. So it's important for us to respond to that. And we do that by delivering additional insight to our teachers and our students. And that insight replaces the historical black box. Many of you are professors or educators. You provide instruction to your fellow citizens or your employees. And there are many, many questions that you can't answer using the old mass production model, such as who needs help? What do they need help with? What's the best way to help? If you can't answer these questions, then you cannot help the students learn more effectively. Adaptive systems answer these questions. These are the key insights that the technology will provide us. Here's an example of a class at Arizona State University. This is a math class. There are 100 students. Each one of these colored lines represents a student's work progress through the adaptive system. On the vertical axis, we have the number of topics mastered. In this case, you would say skills mastered. There were 370 skills that the professors defined for this math class. And we're talking about the horizontal axis from August to December. And what you'll notice initially here is the students start at different levels. This adaptive system, which is called ALEX from McGraw-Hill, does an initial knowledge check, and it can identify the skill level of each of these 100 students. So the challenge for us is to adapt to the students and give them a lesson plan that reflects their need. Now, this is a student who went from 0 topics mastered to all of them in one semester. So this student would be considered a great student. They worked hard, they learned everything we wanted them to learn, and they passed the class. Now, what about this student? This student starts halfway done with the class. If we are teaching them the same lesson, these two students are going to be really upset. One is going to be bored, this student will be bored, and the other will be overwhelmed because they are not ready for a standard lesson somewhere in the middle of those two lines. So what we've done is we have changed everything about this class. This class is entirely personalized. Every student receives a unique lesson plan. We have over 10,000 students take this class every year, and each one has a unique lesson plan. In this case, here's a student who worked hard for about 2 months and then had trouble. So the question for us as educators is, how do we find this student? How do we help this person succeed? That's what we're doing with adaptive instruction. Here's the results. We used to struggle with about 57 to 59% success rate. That means over 40% of our students failed every semester. To today, we've gotten up to 79% success rate in the fall of 2018. That for us was a monumental improvement. Our goal is 90%, so we're still working towards our goal. But to make this kind of improvement means that thousands and thousands of students who would have failed using the old mass production model are now succeeding in mass personalization. So if you look at Singapore and you ask yourself, how do we effectively and efficiently help our workforce gain new skills? You have to look at this type of personalization. Adaptive instruction is the way of the future. Now, we've done this in a lot of different subjects, from biology to psychology, and we even did a philosophy class. We use different vendors. We've been doing it for 9 years, so we've had a lot of time to build a lot of experiments and to make a lot of mistakes. Part of the reason why I was invited to speak with you is because we have made many mistakes and we have learned from our mistakes, and we're trying to help others succeed. So we put together the adaptive courseware as an integral part of the teaching process. Now, the next time when I speak in September, I'm going to talk about how we do this, because there's a lot of detail to go from an old mass production lecture model to a future mass personalization adaptive model. But just so you know, you could do it in any subject, in any discipline, with any lesson. So what's really happening? There's a movement here. When you think about lesson plan, when I went to school, everyone had the same lesson plan. It was called the syllabus. And we all follow the syllabus through the whole course. Today, every syllabus is individualized, variable. Presentation, instead of one presentation to the group, we videotape everything and we do individual presentations. And content, instead of one common content core, we have personalized content. This is a transformation from static to dynamic learning. The static model is not as successful as the dynamic model. You've already seen that in math, but I can show you data from other disciplines, and I'll share that with you in September from biology, from economics, from other classes. The dynamic system reflects and respects the student's need. What's really adapting? Now, this is where we move from strategy to more tactical understanding. What's happening is there are two things that are adapting to the student: the lesson sequence and the content selection. That's it. This is not magic. There is no sort of superpower. It is just the hard work that professors do defining the sequence of lessons and the content to deliver the lesson. Those are the pieces of the machine that are moving. Now, there are 4 things that are helping us guide that adaptation. The first is an algorithm. This is the most complex. We all like to talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence. When you develop an adaptive system, this is the goal. You want to be able to create an algorithm that will predict, just like our phone predicts our navigation path, we want to be able to predict the learning path for every student. That's very difficult to do. Alex has been working for 20 years, and they have just reached the level where they have a very high degree of success using an algorithm. So we have to start working on these to develop that capability. In the meantime, there are 3 other techniques that are effective. One is assessment. For every lesson, we have to have assessment and rapid remediation. We have to be able to help the students continually develop their learning through this process. The next one is association. We build a map of all of the lessons. What are the relationships? What is the sequence between all of these pieces? That has to be defined. So you start to build this instructional infrastructure, and it creates the capability to help the students succeed at a higher level. And finally, the one I like the most is student agency. This is the 4th A. Agency gives the students a feedback loop. They can tell us if the lesson works. They can say whether that video is good or bad. And many of you will be using recommendation engines like Yelp, or even something TripAdvisor or Travelocity. All of those systems are using agency to drive engagement. So we open up the adaptive systems to the students so that they can tell us whether it's working or not. You combine those 4 A's, algorithm, assessment, association, and agency, and you have a very powerful instructional system. All of that is predicated on what I call the ed molecule. You'll recognize this. It's been around for 40 years. There's nothing new here. But what we do is we do all of our development around this data architecture. The skill has to be linked to instructional resources, which have to be linked to assessment activities, which have to be linked back to the skill. Without that relationship, it's impossible to track the student performance. You need to build the data architecture into all of your systems. If you're using an LMS like Moodle or Blackboard or Canvas, you have to think differently. You have to start thinking about the next generation of systems. And this is the data architecture for that generation. All future systems will use the ed molecule to organize the information that we need for our teaching and for the student learning. Now, I talked about the association. When we build these lesson maps, then we can use them across a wide variety of different disciplines. If you think about it, math is a continuum from single-digit counting to complex calculus. That process exists in every discipline. You'll find it in technical training for engineers. You'll find it in sciences, biology, chemistry, physics. There is a map of that discipline that exists that we can use to help us get started. So we bring that information in. Alex, for example, has a map of 3rd grade through 1st year of the university math courses. So all of those have been well documented. Other disciplines, they're not as well developed as math. Now, students don't care about any of this. What they like to know is, what lesson do you want me to learn and how can I learn it? So we take the library of lessons, which are developed by the professors. We use the technology to deliver the right lesson to the right student at the right time, and we bring in the content. So all of these variables are woven together in the system. The skill, the assessment, the content, all combine. So the student is able to demonstrate their knowledge. This process can happen very, very rapidly for the student. I've watched students who are really smart progress through the lessons very rapidly, and other students may need more time. And that's why I call time a variable now, because we start to introduce these variables and the learning process gets stronger. So what does that look like? All of that is deep background, but this is an example of one lesson delivered in biology by one of our vendor partners. And what I want to point out is these are all components that the student will see. Agency is at the top. We ask the student on every lesson, how well do you understand this lesson? And if they say not very well, 17%, that triggers the algorithm to recommend a certain type of content. Now, there's a library of content, and we're picking content based upon the level of confidence that the student has. If they say 100%, then we'll move them on to the next lesson. If they say 50%, then we'll show them something different. So all of these factors are built into the system. Now, even though we show them one or two pieces of content based on the recommendation from the algorithm, they're not going to be just looking at that. They're also going to look at the entire library. We like to make sure everything is open. So if there are 10 pieces of content, then we want to share that with them. We don't want to hide anything. If they need all 10 to learn it, then this is where they want to find it. We don't want them going to Google and Googling the skill. We want them to learn from us. So giving them a good library is critical. And then finally, at the bottom, you'll notice there's the assessment. That's where we actually provide a formative assessment, something to test their knowledge, and we build these into every lesson. So every time they learn something, we check it. That gives the faculty the ability to monitor the student progress. If a student is consistently failing a lesson, then the faculty member can intervene. I'm going to talk about that also in September. What's the role of the professor now if we're delivering instruction in this way? So for the students, we think about this as the 3 R's. Respect their prior knowledge, respond to their learning needs, and reduce the gaps in their understanding. And we can do that with infographics, which allow us to see the progress. Just like I showed you the graphic of the 100 students in math, this is another form of that. And it allows the students to see their progress through the course. For the faculty, it's important that we think about this as 3 M's: monitor the students, measure the curriculum, and maximize the outcome. And we can generate a lot of data to do reports that are very valuable for the instructors. So we're creating insight through the technology, insight that never existed before in real time. Now, how do we measure all that? Well, we look at indicators. I think of them as macro and micro. First, for us at Arizona State, we want the students to complete the course. If we have 2,400 students starting the Google course, we want 2,400 students to finish. And I'm sure Singapore does too, because you invest a lot of money in their education. If they don't finish, then they get no benefit. So that's number 1 for us. We want to reduce the withdrawal rate. Number two, we want them to succeed at a higher rate. If we were only succeeding at 57% and 4 out of 10 students failed, then we failed, right? The university is not providing education if so many students are failing. So we change our attitude to focus on the student. We put the student at the center of this process. We look at satisfaction. What about the student, the instructor, and the administrator? Do they like the learning process? Do they like the technology? Do they like the personalization? This is important because perception is reality. If they're not satisfied, even if they get an A or a top score, they will not have a good learning experience. So we want to make sure that it's not just about the grade, it's about their perception of the learning experience. And finally, we look very carefully at the financials. I started out talking about $21 million that you're investing in 2,400 Singaporeans. Well, we think about the same thing. We think about how much money is wasted when a student does not finish a course. And sometimes that can mean they will drop out of the university, which would be a huge loss. It's a loss for the student, it's a loss for our society, it's a loss for our economy. Those are the things we think about. So money spent, money saved, very important part of this equation. And then finally, on the micro level, we talk about assessments. And I've already mentioned we have many, many levels of assessment. So we can do lesson level assessment, we can do module level assessment, we can do course level assessment. These are the things that the professors want to know. Are the students able to remember and to apply the learning that they're getting from these systems? I talked about how we measure. Now, here's what we've done. When I started at ASU, I defined our mission and objectives for our program on adaptive learning. And I took the mission statement from one of our university design aspirations. So I want to enable student success. What does that mean? Well, there's a number that we attach to that. 90% of our freshmen should come back for their second year. Our goal when we started was 90%, and we were at 65%. Today, we're at 87%. So we have closed our gap dramatically over the last 15 years. What about the other areas? Well, we have a way to measure those too. When we talk about using the knowledge, we want to do applied active learning exercises. We want the students to use the information, not just memorize it. We want 90% of those students to get a C or better, which in the United States means they pass the course. We want to reduce our withdrawal rate to less than 5%, which is part of the equation: lower withdrawal rate, higher success rate, right? These are the factors that we're measuring every course, every semester. And finally, our goal is to provide you, the educators and administrators, with the insight and knowledge of how the students are doing within 2 weeks. If a student is not progressing in the first 2 weeks, the probability that they will fail is much higher. So we have to react quickly, very much like medicine. If someone is injured, they talk about the golden hour. That's the time when they need emergency medical assistance. In education, we have the same thing now. We have this golden week where we try to identify the students that are struggling, and the professors then can provide instruction for them. So where are we in this trip to the future? We are at a point now where we've jumped over the chasm on the adoption cycle, and we're hundreds of universities in the United States that are using some form of adaptive instruction. That's what we want to succeed in Singapore. We want you to put together a program so that all educational experiences are partly provided through this type of system. This is where you can make a transformative difference in the lives of your citizens. So at the end of the session, you should be able to now define and demystify adaptive learning. When you go home and you talk to your children or your partners, you should be able to say, I just learned about how adaptive learning works. What are the key components to delivering the right lesson to the right student at the right time? Also, how do we measure the success of those systems in order to ensure that you're getting a return on your investment? So I like to describe the final quote as a challenge. I love this quote. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. So I want to challenge you to invent the future in Singapore. And I've found that many organizations are doing that right now. From Skills Future to the Institute for Adult Learning to Workforce Singapore, the universities are doing it. I want to encourage you to collaborate to build that instructional infrastructure and work together to succeed and help your students develop new skills. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to take questions.
All right, thank you, Dill. I hope everyone can hear me. We do have many questions on our Q&A board. Some are more related to each other. We can probably start off with the first question, and quite related to how Dill has ended off with the sharing. Our attendees like to know, in your opinion, Dill, how would adaptive learning be our next step, and how should we go about this journey for the university or teaching institutions to start, especially when we are starting from scratch?
I think you're going to need three things. You're going to need technology vendors. You're going to have to identify companies in Singapore that are willing to work with you to build this instructional infrastructure. We've looked all over the world. We've found them in Korea. We've found vendor partners in Scotland, in Ireland, in the United States. So I know there are going to be good companies in Singapore that are building these kinds of systems. Second thing is you want to bring the model. This is important. You have to give them clear guidance. We work with all of our vendor partners very closely to ensure that they understand what we're trying to do, that they can relate to the final step. And the third piece is you have to retrain all of your professors. This is a really daunting task. You have to think about, how do we teach all of the old professors how to live in the future world? We've been at this now for 9 years, and we are still working our way through. We have thousands of professors. And it's a critical part, because if you build the technology and the professors don't use it, then it has no value. So that program has got to be part of Skills Future. You're reskilling your teachers, not just your workers. And we've got programs in September. I'm going to talk a lot about that. Like, how do we get our professors to change what they do in the classroom?
Right, thank you. We have a question from Wai Kyung on mass personalization. As part of adaptive learning, we need to know how what is the need for each student and their profile quite well, right? Be it their cognitive abilities or their social needs and motivations to learn. Now, how does ASU uncover each student's needs, expectations, and profiles in order to personalize the curriculum? And on that similar note, is in your sharing on the algorithm, does that mean that every student will have to take a self-assessment diagnostic too in order to know this starting point?
Yes, that's the critical piece. There are three parts to the adaptive learning process. The first one is the initial assessment. Every course and every student should take the initial assessment. Second is the adaptive instruction. That's the learning process. Based upon the initial knowledge, you're going to have a different path. And the last piece is the final exam or the final assessment, if it's a project or some type of special work that they do. So those three pieces are combined to create the learning experience. Now, I want to go back to the first part of your question. In order to identify not just the knowledge level or the skill level of the student, but also their personal needs, if they have social, emotional needs, if they have economic needs, you have to introduce that material into your assessment. I think it's really critical because if a student, for example, has low self-esteem and they don't think they can learn, then we know as learning scientists that that's going to inhibit their progress. So sometimes it's a psychological barrier, not a learning problem. And what we found is that you now can identify these things. One of the interesting things about agency is when we ask a student, do they think they learned the lesson? We get two pieces of information that are critical to understanding that student. One is their confidence level. Do they believe that they've learned that lesson? And the second is the results of the assessment. Do they actually know the material? So if you plot that on a 2x2 matrix, and I'll include this in the next conversation, so I'll provide you with some visuals because I like this a lot. If a student says, yes, I understand it, and they get it right, then we don't care. They're good. They keep going. If they say, no, I don't understand it, but they get it right on the assessment, then there might be a yellow light. Like they need more confidence. If they say, I get it, but they get it wrong, then we're going to have an orange light, right? Flashing. And if they say, I don't understand, and they get it wrong, then it's a red light. So for a professor to be able to look at a student and say, this student is in the red zone, I need to talk to that student first. That's what our professors do. They use the information from these systems to focus their attention and to focus their instruction on the students that need it most. The students in the green zone, they're going to be fine. They're going to keep going and succeed. If they do fall into the red zone, then we focus on them.
Okay, thank you. Maybe at this point, I'd just like to address to the attendees, if you have posed any questions on the chat, please repost these questions onto our Q&A box so that we will be able to have a record of them should we not be able to answer them today. Because if it's on the chat, we will not be able to get to them on time, right? Thank you. Now, coming back to the Q&A, we do have some fundamental questions just to make sure that we are understanding the concept of adaptive learning correct. That is, first one, is adaptive learning the same as differentiated learning? That's one. And that are MOOC and edX and Coursera examples of adaptive learning, right? So that's what the attendees are curious to know.
First, take these one at a time because these are,
okay.
The first is yes. You can call it whatever you want. Differentiated, adaptive, personalized. You're going to hear all of those terms. I personally like this framework. Personalized is the umbrella. Adaptive is one technique.
Right.
Another technique is a tutor. Now, how many of you had a tutor in school and your parents paid for a tutor when you were in secondary school? Okay, a tutor provides personalized instruction. And that's been the old model. For 100 years or 200 years, we've had personal instruction from tutors. So umbrella is personalized. Technology and tutors are two techniques. Now, the second question, MOOCs, LMS, those are not adaptive. You rarely see them. I have a really big problem with MOOCs because they offer scale, but they don't have flexibility. One of the weaknesses in the MOOC is that you cannot take pieces of the MOOC and reassemble them.
Yes.
You're going to get the whole course. And for any professor who's ever taught, you know that sometimes you need to adapt your course. So think about the adaptive systems as next generation MOOC. I have another term for this. I call it a GAIN, Global Adaptive Instructional Network. So after MOOCs, we're going to be building GAINs. And Singapore is in a position where you have good skills defined, you have good partners with universities on instruction, and you could build GAINs that will reflect your needs, I think, fairly quickly.
Right, thank you. We are also curious to know if adaptive learning will apply to courses that are very short in duration, such as 1 day, 2 day workshop. This is especially so in the case of working adults who take on some CET modular programs with our Institute of Higher Learning. And that is there any difference in terms of the design when it comes to training for hard skill or teaching hard skills vis-a-vis soft skills to these students?
Okay, two really good questions. I have not used this word yet, but I'm going to use it today. Pedagogy. Right. That's what we're going to focus on in September. For today, what you're asking is about pedagogy. And the answer for the first question is yes, adaptive systems can be useful for a 1-day workshop, because what you do is you shift all of the lecture online, and the students do all of that work before. And I'll talk about that shift in a month. But the bottom line is we're trying to maximize the use of our time together. So if I could have done this, I would have given you this video a week ago, and we would have spent our entire time answering questions. And that would have been a much more effective use of your time rather than listening to me for half an hour. However, we didn't do that. So now we're burning valuable time. I would rather spend more time on questions, because these are the things that matter most. So 1-day workshop should be all pre-work online. And when you do the workshop, you're solving problems. That's the key to the success of this model. When we do that shift in pedagogy, we create new opportunities for the learners. And we found that they respond much better. If you went through a business school, you remember the case studies. You had to read the whole case. And when you came to class, there was no lecture. It was just question, 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 question. You know, what were the financials? What were the human resources? What were the other factors? And so you have to think that way now for every learning experience. And digitally, with an adaptive instructional system, we can do that.
Right. So to all our attendees who are very interested to know more about the pedagogy and the implementation, do remember to sign up for our session in September. We hope to address most of these questions in that session. Now, coming back to
By the way, yes. I wanted to include them today. I had put a lot of slides in there, and then I realized it would have taken the whole hour. We would have not gotten any questions. So yesterday I took out a third of my slides. And so I apologize, because these are great questions, but we will get to them, definitely.
Okay, we do have some questions on for Dil to share more on ASU experience. For you earlier shared that there are 20% of the students who maybe could not pass after being aided by the adaptive learning. So what is the action plan for this group of students, and how do you work with your faculty to support? Yeah,
I love this question. We had to change the rules of our university.
Right.
What we decided was time used to be fixed. You got 1 semester to finish the class. And if you didn't finish, you have to go all the way back to the beginning and start over. So what we said was, if we're going to give everyone a personalized learning experience, what we want to do is we want to make time a variable. So now we have a new grade. We call it the stretch grade. If a student works really hard and gets almost done, we give them another semester free. Now, this is a huge investment for the university. We decided that it's our obligation at Arizona State to help the students succeed. So in order to get to 90%, when we give students the extra semester, we actually get all the way to 86%. I didn't show you that in the graphic because I didn't know if you were going to ask about a stretch semester. But we've taken the technology and we've created a new model around that technology. And it took some time. It took us about 4 years to figure this out. But once we did it, it was a huge advantage. Now, 86% of our students finish that class successfully. It takes them a little longer, but we're willing to make the commitment to success. And that's the way we think now, is we're going to break all the rules. We're going to change everything you ever knew about education in order to ensure the success of the students. You know, if it took you, let's say you didn't do well in computer programming when you were 18 years old. At 28, you may be more motivated and you may have read a lot of material between 18 and 28. So what we want to do is we want to honor that. We want to capture all of that information and we want you to become a great programmer. We don't want to fail you again. We want you to succeed. This is all about the success of the students.
Right. Okay. It's at 9:54 now. I guess we will have time for one more question before we close off the day. And I guess what we really want to know is, apart from your sharing that one of the challenges is change the mindset of the professors, what other drawbacks or difficulties did you experience from using adaptive learning so far that we should be mindful of?
Yeah, the transition costs are very high. You have to bring a long-term vision. 9 years we've been at this. I've worked with hundreds of professors, and each one brings a set of experiences and biases to the process. So it's a very personal process to transform the culture. It takes a lot of leadership. I'm going to talk about this in September too.
Okay.
We named a leader at Arizona State. He is the vice rector of student success. His entire job is to help students succeed at a higher rate. And he's willing to break every rule. He's willing to invest whatever it takes to make that happen. He was my mentor for the first 7 years I worked at Arizona State, and I still work closely with him. And that's the kind of position, attitude you need. You need a leader, a group of leaders who are willing to invest continuously. You need resources like the $21 million that you're investing in your citizens. That's what I think Singapore has. I think you have vision, I think you have leadership, and I think you have resources. So there's no reason you shouldn't succeed here. You've already done miracles in the last 75 years in terms of your economic development. So the next 10 years should be totally about transformation. And everyone looks to Singapore for the future, for the vision of what's happening. And if you adopt this program at the national scale, then you will be the global leader in adaptive instruction. I guarantee it, for the next decade.
Right. Thank you very much, Dale, for your kind words. We have a whole host of questions from the attendees, as everyone can see. Unfortunately, because of time, we are unable to address all of them today. I'd like to assure all attendees that we will look through the questions that have not been answered. If they are to be covered in the September sessions, we will indicate them as so. Otherwise, we will take on the questions either by Dale or by IAL and SSG. Now, today's session will be hosted on MySkillsFuture portal, as well as SSG LinkedIn page and YouTube channel. Do give us about a week or two for us to complete the recording and the blurbs, and we will send an email to everyone when they are ready and they are hosted. These will be done certainly before our next session on the 23rd of September. Part 2, as we know, is also scheduled at 9 a.m. on the 23rd of September. Dale will talk more on the use of the adaptive learning systems. We will see some of the questions that have been posed in today's session and see how best that we can also include them in his sharing. For registration of the 23rd September session, do register by about 21st so that there is time for the administration and for the link to be sent to you ahead. Now, before we close, I also like to invite everyone to take a 2-minute survey with us. You will see this QR code on screen. Please be assured that your sharing will be kept confidential. Your sharing is very important to both IAL and SSG in shaping our next series of webinar topics as well as the flow. And we hope that these webinar sessions has been beneficial to everyone. So meanwhile, stay safe, stay healthy, and we thank Dil. We'll see you in September, and we hope to see everybody else in September too. Thank you. We'll be leaving the screen on for the next couple of minutes. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for attending this and for contributing all these good questions. I look forward to seeing you in September.
I believe we will be circulating the EDM again after today, so that for those who have already deleted the EDMs and for your other colleagues who are interested in the September session, you can use the EDM to sign up for the September session.
Manyong, thank you for all your help.
Thank you, Dil.
I'll start working on the September material. I may be able to put together a Google Doc. If you get me all the questions in the QA, I can possibly build a Google Doc that we can share with everybody with answers.
Sure, sure. We will get to you on the sharing of the replies to these questions.
Great. I'm going to stop recording now.
Yes, please. And I think we will be closing the screen. For those who did not manage to scan the code on time, we will be sending an email out to all